Today's video is brought to you by The Crimer, the totally free, underground, true crime newsletter. Some crimes, no matter how much you consider the details of them, fail to ever really make sense. For many of us, a mother is a real-life angel in our lives, someone that we can rely on for unconditional love. But for others, a mother is someone not to be trusted, and in fact, they are someone to be feared. This is an additional warning for viewer discretion. Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to CASE Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing, with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing, incredibly supportive CASE family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. If your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. Our love and respect goes out to all those affected by this dark case. This video is brought to you by thecrimer.com. For reasons I can't even mention here, true crime creators are getting crushed right now. And that means you, the true crime community, are missing out on the content that you're actually here to see. The algorithm is broken and true crime is dropping off of your home screen. I know we've all noticed. That is why I've created The Crimer, the totally free underground true crime newsletter. The Crimer delivers you the carefully curated true crime content that you actually want to see. From unknown grassroots creators and journalists to high-budget must-see documentaries and everything in between. Well, not everything, just the really good stuff. Head over to thecrimer.com and join for totally free right now. That is TheCrimer.com. And I'll see you in your inbox. Elizabeth Diane Downs was born in Phoenix, Arizona on August 7, 1955, to parents Wesley Linden and Willardine Fredrickson. Her family was conservative in its values, which meant that Diane, the name that she went by, wasn't allowed to wear things that other girls her age often did, like makeup or stylish clothing. As a result, Diane didn't always fit in with the other girls, and sometimes this meant that she was picked on. Diane didn't like her father's rules and lectures, which she felt were just too strict. She also began to resent how little time her mother spent with her, and how much time her mother spent with her father. As children sometimes do when they think their parents are too strict, Diane began to rebel shortly after turning 14. She met a man named Steve Downs during her time as a student at Moon Valley High School in Phoenix. Her parents didn't like that she was dating Steve. He was 2 years older than she was, but she kept seeing him anyway. When Steve graduated from high school, he joined the Navy. When Diane then graduated from high school, she began attending Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. This was located in Orange, California. Her college career, however, only lasted 1 year. This was because she was kicked out for her alleged promiscuous behavior. After her expulsion, she went back to Arizona to stay with her parents once again. While Steve and Diane were apart, they stayed in contact until Steve came back from the Navy. Once he was out, Diane and Steve got married in November of 1973. They then had a daughter named Christiane in 1974. And another daughter named Cheryl in 1976. Despite their growing family, Steve and Diane had an unstable marriage right from the very beginning. Diane frequently left him and lived with her parents again before once again going back to Steve. When Diane became pregnant again after her first 2 children, she made the decision to have an abortion to end the pregnancy. She did, however, feel bad about her choice. She later decided she would like to have more children. Steve, who apparently didn't want any more children, had a vasectomy after Diane terminated this pregnancy. Allegedly, Diane had multiple affairs and became pregnant once again. As a result of her affairs, Diane gave birth in 1979 to Steve and Daniel, her 3rd child. Steve was upset about Diane's affairs and knew that their child wasn't his. The couple had also now been fighting about money. This seemed to be a constant source of contention in their marriage. Their issues caused them to finally divorce in 1980. Now, Diane had to support herself financially, so in 1981, she began working full-time at the United States Postal Service. Neighbours had started to notice that she wasn't a nurturing mother to her 3 children. Her children would often ask for food and didn't have warm clothes to wear during the winter. Sometimes Christy, who was only 6 at the time, would be left in charge of her younger siblings. And Cheryl had once stated to a neighbour that she was scared of her mother. Despite her reported failings as a mother, Diane earned extra money by becoming a surrogate mother. Diane gave birth to another child named Jennifer on May 8, 1982. As a result of this surrogacy, Diane was paid $10,000. As part of the criteria for becoming a surrogate mother, Diane had to take 2 psychiatric tests. One of these tests yielded alarming results. It implied that Diane was in fact psychotic. Diane would joke to her friends about the results of this test. By April of 1983, Diane had decided she needed a fresh start and she moved to Oregon. On May 19, 1983, Diane, now living in Oregon, would begin making headlines all across the United States. Diane drove that night to Mackenzie Williamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. There, hospital staff had a grisly sight to deal with. Diane had been shot in her left arm. Her 3 children had also been shot in the car at close range. Cheryl had sadly lost her life as a result of this shooting, and 3-year-old Danny, as Stephen was now known, had been paralysed from the waist down due to his wounds. The oldest child, 8-year-old Christy, had a stroke from her injuries. Both of these children's injuries were extremely serious. It wasn't immediately certain if they'd be able to survive. Diane's injury, however, wasn't so serious. She was able to speak with hospital employees to tell them just what had happened. She said she took her children to a friend's house to visit, and afterwards she had decided to take a scenic route home. This was even though it was dark and all her kids were already sleeping in the car. According to Diane's account, as she drove on a deserted rural road in the Springfield area at around 10 p.m, she saw a bushy-haired man standing in the road. He was attempting to get her attention so that she would stop. She told police and hospital workers that she stopped to speak with the man to see what he wanted. He quickly told her to give him the keys to her car. When she refused, a physical fight ensued, and he then shot her in the arm. He then proceeded to open the door to the driver's seat of her vehicle and shot each of her offspring, according to Diane. She said she only escaped after tricking the man into thinking she had thrown her car keys alongside the road when in fact she hadn't. Diane said when he went to search for her keys, she got into the driver's seat and drove to the hospital. Immediately, the police department warned the public to watch out for an armed man who might be on the loose, a man that would present a threat to anyone else he crossed paths with. However, a number of things led police to be skeptical of Diane's story right from the beginning. This included her reportedly calm reaction at the hospital after allegedly witnessing a horrific crime against her children, despite the fact that one of her children had lost their battle in front of her, and the other 2 were now in the hospital fighting for their lives. Diane didn't seem upset. She made comments that seemed heartless considering what the children had just been through. Comments such as how the blood had ruined her car, and how the shooting had ruined her vacation. It was also strange that she would choose to take a deserted scenic route in the dark, when she wouldn't even be able to see any of the scenery. The police thought it was odd that Diane, who was right-handed, would suffer a gunshot wound to her left arm while struggling with the gunman. Police reasoned that it would have actually been likelier for the would-be carjacker to just end Diane, before he attempted to shoot her sleeping offspring who couldn't defend themselves.
When he swung around, he was pointing, when he swung around, it hit the tips of my fingers. The gun hit the tips of my fingers, and that snapped me. And I went, wait a minute. I'm not trapped by society. I don't care if he is bigger. If I stand here and I say, Yeah, here, take the keys. I mean, there's nothing I can do. You win because you have the gun. My kids are going to die. And I'm not going to let my kids die. And so instead of giving him the keys, I feigned throwing the keys. He did not take time to point the gun and shoot me, obviously, because he would have shot me the same way he did the kids. When he was swinging in the direction of the keys, firing the gun, he hit my arm. Everybody says, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. I have a steel plate on my arm. I will for 1.5 years. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died. Except maybe Danny.
There were other unusual behaviours too, such as calling a married man named Robert Knickerbocker from the hospital. She used to work with Knickerbocker in Arizona and she did have an affair with him. However, Knickerbocker indicated to the police that he was happy when she moved to Oregon. He reportedly told police that Diane had in fact stalked him, and he feared she might potentially murder his wife so that the two of them could be together again. After Diane moved to Oregon, Knickerbocker and his wife were able to mend their relationship. A forensic investigation didn't support Diane's version of events. When the driver's side of the vehicle was searched for clues, blood spatter couldn't be found. There was also no gunpowder residue on the door. This seemed strange if the shooter had truly opened that door and angled the weapon to shoot in the back seat. Police determined that the gun that had been used in the murder was a .22 pistol. However, the murder weapon was never found. While Diane did not tell the authorities that she was a gun owner, Knickerbocker and her ex-husband Steve told the police that she did own a gun, a .22 pistol, a weapon that she had bought while living in Arizona. To further discredit Diane's story, her statement that she drove quickly to the hospital was contradicted by witnesses. They in fact saw her vehicle moving at a snail's pace towards a hospital. These witnesses estimated her driving speed to be only 5 to 7 miles per hour. This is obviously much slower than a concerned mother would be driving in this situation. 4 days following this shocking crime, police asked Diane to do a reenactment of the events from that night.
I'm throwing the keys, okay? I'm throwing the keys.
Diane was laughing and smiling for the cameras that were recording the reenactment. Further proof that she wasn't too upset or traumatized by what had happened to her children. Evidence kept on mounting up against Diane, and on February 28, 1984, she was arrested and faced charges of murder, attempted murder, and criminal assault. After her arrest, Diane's story slightly changed. She had always alleged that a man fired the shots during a failed carjacking, but in later versions she said that the man knew her name, implying that he knew her. The case went to trial. During her court appearances, prosecution painted a picture of Diane as a mother who would willingly sacrifice her children so that she could continue to be with Knickerbocker, a man who didn't want to raise children. It was Diane's tendency for talking too much that made her look guilty in the first place, with her making unusual statements at the hospital. And in her court case, her words would once again hurt her, but this time they were in written form. Her secret diaries revealed her obsession with Knickerbocker and the ominous fact that he didn't want to be around children. The last entry Diane wrote in her diary was just 2 days before the incident. During her trial, Diane's childhood relationship with Steve and her ability as a mother were all brought into the limelight. Whilst talking about her younger years, Diane said she didn't marry Steve because she was in love with him. She had only married him to get away from her parents so that she could have children. Diane's lawyer tried to explain her strange and detached behaviour at the hospital after the shootings. She pointed to her strict upbringing at the hands of her father. Diane testified she was never allowed to cry or show her emotions as a child. One of the key pieces of testimony in the trial came from someone who had allegedly witnessed Diane shooting her offspring. Her daughter, Christy, had recovered enough from her injury after months of therapy to be able to speak once again. Christy said that she never saw a man on the night of the crime. While crying, she testified that her mother parked up along the side of a road. and shot each one of her children before pointing a gun at her own arm and pulling the trigger once more. Christie's brave testimony left no doubt in the case, and on June 17, 1984, Diane was found guilty on each charge. Diane Downs received a sentence of life in prison and an additional 50 years. Despite the lengthy sentence, Diane was eligible to apply for parole after just 25 years of her sentence. Shortly after her trial ended, Diane had her fifth child. This was a girl who was placed in the custody of the state of Oregon until she was luckily adopted. Diane said the father was someone she had seduced whilst working on her postal route before she had been arrested. The lead prosecutor in the case, Fred Hughey, and his wife, later adopted Christy and Danny, Diane's two children who had survived the attack. Diane wasn't through with making news headlines after she began serving her time in prison. In 1987, she climbed a tall wire fence to escape from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center in Oregon. She eluded capture for 10 days, and when she was finally found, another 5 years were added to her sentence. She was also now moved to New Jersey Department of Corrections. This was after Hughey argued that the prison she escaped from was too close to Danny and Christy, who were now in his care. Diane's horrific, sensationalized crime captured the interest of Hollywood. A TV movie called Small Sacrifices with Farrah Fawcett starring as Diane came out in 1989. At 2 parole hearings in 2010 and 2020, Diane continued to insist that she wasn't responsible for the crime.
They brought in a mock-up of the car, and Fred Hughey got a gun, and he was reenacting the crime. And when he was going through the motions of firing the gun at the Christy doll and at the Cheryl doll and at the Danny doll, he couldn't shoot the Danny doll because the Danny doll was back here. And he raised up and he looked at me, and I went like this, and his face, he had a look of incredulation on his face, and his mouth started to open, and I nodded my head yes, and he had to switch the gun to the left hand. A right-handed person could not have shot the Danny doll. He adopted my children, and according to Christy, never said a bad word against me. Ever. That was out of Christy's mouth. Fred Hughey, in all the time that he raised her, never spoke ill of me. I believe that Fred Hughey knows that there is a man out there that was hunting my children, and it wasn't until after Christy told her schoolmates, she drew pictures in school, and she said, "This is the man who shot us." I lied in court because they wanted me to say this and they wouldn't leave me alone. Dr. Peters, she said, Dr. Peterson kept pressuring me and he wouldn't leave me alone.
Both of her parole attempts so far have been denied, and she remains in prison. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? Please do let me know down in the comments. If you appreciate what I'm doing here, please do hit that like button. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.